Travelers of the Earth. It is the 30th of March, and another Drago dog walk. Drago. Okay, there's the Drago moment. Anyways, so we've got negotiations coming up. Lavrov has stated there will be in Istanbul, unlike what the West was trying to push for the Vatican. Now, why not the Vatican? Oh, maybe because the majority of the Ukrainian Nazis are Catholics. So to say that the Vatican is some kind of a neutral power in all of this is as ludicrous as to say that the U.S. is a neutral power, an arbiter of peace in all this. The Vatican is the moral backbone of these Nazi elements and has always been. And America is their financial arms and, to a degree, military backbone. As more HIMARS missiles were flying in, targeted by Americans, shot by Americans, brought in by Americans, who, by the way, aren't part of this war. Okay, right. Istanbul, I guess the only reason you can trust Erdogan in this is because he's trying to play everybody constantly. So nobody exactly is too loyal to him, though Trump has been getting very friendly with Erdogan lately. I think probably India would have been a better choice, somewhere like that. Maybe Saudi Arabia, then Turkey, a NATO member, which again is going to be interesting once Israel launches its war in Iran. If Turkey gets involved, if this becomes a regional war and Turkey gets involved, nah. Drago. Rядом. Nah. Which side does the U.S. go on? Oh, we know which side it'll go on. It'll go on the side of the owners, the Israelis. Even though it doesn't have a single alliance agreement signed with the Israelis, never has. But Turkey is a NATO member, and the U.S. is duty-bound by agreement to fight on the side of Turkey if Turkey gets attacked first by the Israelis, if it gets involved. But again, we know the U.S. is going to side with those that own the U.S., not those that it's signed any kind of agreements with. That's how things run in this world. So yeah, Lavrov stated where it's going to be, the Russian memorandum. Keith Kellogg told us all the other day that the Ukraine has finished its memorandum. I will be very surprised if all 22 of Keith Kellogg's super plan on punish Russia and simp for Zelensky and make sure that Kellogg's daughter makes lots of money plan isn't 100% the same thing as the Ukrainian side's plan. What's the over-under on that one? Right, so we understand where this is going. Keith Kellogg's plan is the, or I'm sure 95% is going to be the Ukrainian memorandum. Honestly speaking, these talks are going nowhere, and they cannot go anywhere. First of all, the talks concluded, or the talks are going to start after the prisoner exchange. The prisoner exchange already happened. So Russia gave over 1,000 Ukrainians, and I know this from my sources very close to that point, that they barely got 1,000 people to go to exchange. The Ukrainian POWs do not want to be exchanged because they know what's going to happen to them. If they were politically questionable, they'll probably be disappeared or shot in the back of the head, because that's how Ukraine, the beacon of democracy, rolls. And all the rest are just going to get shoved to the front again to die. And they're going to be under enough blocking guard to make sure they don't surrender a second time. Well, I'm sure, like I said, quite a few of these guys are probably going to wind up dead by the hands of their own people. So no, they didn't want to go. Out of the about 80,000 prisoners of war that Russia holds, it was hard enough to find 1,000. They were stupid enough to go over there. On the flip side, Ukraine couldn't find 1,000 Russian POWs. So there were almost 150, 160 civilians that were handed over. Part of these civilians were hostages that Ukraine took out of Kursk. Just like a terrorist organization, Ukraine is and supports worldwide, Ukraine took civilian hostages, took them over, and then used them as a bargaining chip. So, no difference there than the Islamic terrorists that Ukraine regularly supports militarily, intelligence-wise, and so on. they function absolutely the same way. Additionally, there were lots of other civilians that were handed over in exchange for these POWs. These people are either people that are pro-Russian that the SBU arrested and hasn't murdered yet, summary executions that the SBU does, or just tortures people to death, beats them to death. That's how democracy is. That is Western democracy. Let's not kid ourselves. On top of that, we've got a lot of civilians, Russian civilians, that happened to be in Ukraine at that time. You know, I was in Ukraine working on a project in April 21, and if they hadn't found out I was Russian and told the project manager that you know, not to have me return, and I didn't quite let them know I was Russian, but it got slipped out. So I might have been there when it all started. It's a long enough project, but thankfully, no, I wasn't. But as an example, a friend of mine's friend's dad was in jail for 3 years in Ukraine because he was there in Kiev on a business trip. Drove on his own car. So the car officer got confiscated and he got arrested because he had a Russian passport. Civilian, absolutely civilian. And he got thrown into a jail or concentration camp for 3 years where he sat out. So he got returned as part of this group. And there's more than a few people like that. The Ukrainian regime just grabbed off the streets. So that's democracy for you, baby. That's the beacon of democracy. That's how democracy runs. Speaking of democracy and running, the 17th package of senseless sanctions is no longer just on Russia. Because, simply put, there isn't enough Russians anymore of any kind of sense to... Drago, иди сюда. На, Drago, рядом, на. To sanction. So they have to keep coming up with new people. I mean, you're not going to sanction Ivan Ivanov, the farmer. Nobody's heard of. So you got to somehow get people at least semi... public to sanction. So the EU has shown its nice Nazi colors. I had a little graphic of the EU flag where part of the stars are already swastikas, and there's a tag on there, reloading in process, 90% complete. So yeah, I mean, that is what it is. They've gone back to their core values, core traditional values of an autocratic Nazi state. Drago, иди сюда. Пошли. So, what do we got? Anna Liep, and there was another German. She's a war correspondent. She's been living in Donetsk for a while, so the German government had already opened a case against her, 3 years in jail because she countered the German propaganda, pro-Ukrainian propaganda, with things like, you know, videos and eyewitness statements. God forbid you do that. They closed her account before they even tried her, and they closed her parents, who are divorced, so they closed their separate accounts. So she got her mother out. I guess her father's still there. So that's how the German government runs. Not only are we going to punish you before we even take you to court, but we're going to punish your relatives too. I'm sure they'll still go after just anybody who even knew her. We'll just close their accounts too, because, you know, that's just how the German democracy runs. So this is on the EU level. Kaja Kallas, her branch, has recommended, and thus the executive of the EU, minus any court dealings, because who needs a court in a dictatorship, in a technocratic dictatorship, has declared that these two people are now sanctimony. They are not allowed into the EU, even though both are German citizens. They don't have dual citizenship, straight up German citizens. Their accounts and everything they own are now confiscated. And because they questioned the EU line on Ukraine. They were misinforming, and they were labeling the good name of Ukraine. That's right. In the EU, you have protective classes. Just like in the US, you have a protective class called Zionists. that you can't criticize without the U.S. government going after you, and especially on the state level, governments going after you. Now in the EU, you have a protected class called Ukrainians. They can do no wrong. You cannot point out anything they say because that goes against the EU values. So much for freedom of speech. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Freedom of speech, or some form of it. You have absolute freedom of speech in the EU as long as you say what the executive branch of the EU wants you to say. Anything else, and you're a damned Putin apologist, genocider, or whatever else they want to call you for that day. So that's that. That's how that little point goes. So much for freedom. So why negotiations are going to go nowhere? How are they going to go anywhere? Look, these are two absolutely opposing viewpoints, and there's no middle ground. The U.S. thinks there's a middle ground because you've got a president who does real estate deals, and you've got a bunch of other people who are basically on the same level. They don't understand, or they refuse to understand existential threats. I'm sure if Russian bases were in Mexico with missiles aimed at the U.S., U.S. would invade Mexico as an existential threat and exterminate everything that moved, just because that's how the U.S. runs. Yeah, it's all white and pretty until you look under the hood and see the genocides, the 200 years of genocide, longer if you actually go through the colonies. We can start, one of the more famous ones is the King Philip's War. But, you know, there's lots of examples. You don't have to dig very deep. So anyways, these are two absolutely opposed, diametrically opposed positions. Ukraine, everybody leaves, or okay, fine, we'll maybe recognize Crimea, but even then, that's only under pressure. But other than that, everybody leaves, and you pay reparations, and you cut your own throat in the middle of the of Red Square as punishment, and blah blah and blah blah blah. And the Russian side of, as Lavrov put, no Russian is going to be living under the Zelensky regime, period. Which means, you know, if Zelensky wants to run away to Lvov and have a little government amongst his Nazi buddies, he can try to do that. Anything else ain't flying. Привет. Да. So yeah, so the Russian position, of course, is we're taking, and they're talking about 7. No, it's not going to be 7 provinces. It's going to be 11 provinces. It's going to be the Donbass. So you get Donetsk, you get Lugansk, Zaporozhye, and Kherson, which are the 4 already, plus Crimea, so it's 5. Realistically, it's going to be Kharkov, Sumy. It's going to be Odessa, Nikolaev, Chernigov. It's going to be Poltava, Dnipropetrovsk, and probably Kiev, which are all Russian lands. Colonel McGregor, when he was mentioning that up to the Dnieper those are Russian lands, but that aren't, that's not correct. The correct point is everything bordering both sides of the Dnieper is all Russian land. Absolutely all Russian land. Further west, it's still Russian land, historically, if you go back far enough. Because even a lot of the lands bordering the Polish areas, like even Lvov, was built by Russian princes. Granted, they were there, the Poles have been there since about the 1500s. But the 300 years before that, they were Russian lands. But fine, the Poles can have that. As a matter of fact, Putin actually even said that. He wouldn't mind at all if the Poles went and grabbed their more historical, because they actually sat there longer than we did, lands back. So for Polish nationalists, actual nationalist Poles, that should come as a very big, happy send from Vladimir Vladimirovich. Go take your lands. They're your lands. And there were a lot of Poles there until the Ukrainian Nazis literally butchered them like animals. The things that they did is, I mean, if you look at the archival photos, absolute animals. That's what these people were, the way they butchered these women and children. tie the children up. There's an actual monument to that. They tied a lot of small children. You're talking about 3, 4, 5-year-old children with concertina wire to trees and left them in the night to freeze to death. They would literally cut out the babies out of the mother's wounds and put it in the hands of the dead mother and take photos of that. And they get off on these photos. I mean, these are not just sick people. These are satanic entities that have to be destroyed. You can't live with people like that. You know, there's a threshold that you cross. Once you've crossed that threshold, there's no going back. There's no, we forgive you. Because you cannot live with people who have done that kind of crime. And you can never trust people like that they won't do it again. I mean, we're talking about basically whole units of serial murderers. What are you going to do with people like that? That's human cancer. Send them to God and let God sort them out, which is his prerogative. So there's that point. So yeah, let the Poles take back their lands. Putin's flat out said that. We don't mind, by all means. So that, but then again, you got Tusk and you had Duda before him who were actively supporting the Nazi Ukrainians, who were making training camps for them. As part of the NATO plans. So you've got that kind of lunacy. You know, whose side were they on? Well, definitely weren't on the side of Poles. You know, they may be of the Polish government. I mean, if there's ever an example, kushai. If there's ever an example of a government that's absolutely not on the historical side of its own people, there you go. Well, England too. You know, just as a thought, there are more than a few imams. There are several imams in Turkey that claim that old Prince Charlie converted to Islam back in the 90s. He has to keep, if he has to keep it quiet because by British law, it has to be a Protestant Church of England king. No other religion, no other Christian religion, no other religion, period. Otherwise, he is ineligible to sit the throne. But if you look at the official dual system of governance in the UK, yeah, quite literally, the lowest on the tier is a white Christian Briton, and a male at that. Black Christian Britons are just a little bit higher than that. Because they are a minority ethnically, but religiously they're not the right religion. Oh, it's insane. It's absolutely insane if you look at what happens in England. Absolute police state. Absolute police state. Whatever its claims are, but I mean, it is what it is. Just look at the results of it. So there's that. There's that. And how that runs. What are we going to see in the future? Well, you know, we're not going to see any kind of... Obviously, we're not going to see any kind of negotiated peace. The only negotiated peace this ends in is capitulation. Preferably with Zelensky in chains, if not dead. I mean, that's just how it is. That's exactly how it's going to be. And nothing else is going to be accepted by the Russian public. Actually, Putin is extremely restrained. Because between the generals and the public opinion, Kyiv would have been Gaza'd by now. For everything that's done. At least the center of Kyiv, where the government buildings are, would have been Gaza'd. That's a new term, Gaza'd. I guess you're going to call it, Nuremberg or whatever, or Dresden. Of course, the Americans burned down every single German city to the ground. Dresden was just the last one. 5 million dead civilians just off of the US and UK fire terror bombings. I need to do a column just about that. I did a paper on that back in university. It was really eye-opening. I didn't really know anything on the subject. I was given the subject. It was an ROTC, and this major assigned me the subject. And then he gave me a C, not because of the quality of the writing, where I didn't have it annotated. You know, I did my research like a good cadet, but because he disagreed with the findings that the US and UK were committing genocide, even though everything was annotated in detail. But yeah, he just didn't like the finding. But again, he assigned that subject to me. I don't know what the hell he was expecting me to come up with, other than the truth, the historic truth, which he didn't like. So yeah, that was a first eye opener on reality of, you get the honor, this, that, that you're told the officers have to show and be an embodiment of, and then you get the reality. So as a young cadet, that was one of those learning moments. Okay, God bless. I've got to run. We will see you on the next one. Oh, and please, please, hit the like button, share. If you want to support me, by all means, I will be more than happy. If you can support me monetarily, I've got a Bitcoin wallet number in the description. I also have an old Bank of America account that's still open. You can do a transfer of that. If not, I mean, if you can just even share, that's already support. So, by all means, thank you very much. God bless.